Hi everyone, this is Gabriel Bismut, and today I'm gonna be talking about simple exercises for beginner jazz violinists that you can play on the 12-bar blues in order to master simple scales and arpeggios and the 12-bar blues structure. Beginners tend to get lost when they improvise on a chord structure, even a simple one like the 12-bar blues, so these exercises will help you hear the chord changes and be more familiar with the chord structure. On this video, I'm only going to be talking about the major blues, which is more adapted to a harmonic approach than the minor blues. On the first part of this video, I'm going to do a short reminder of the 12-bar blues structure. Then we're going to study arpeggios exercises, scale exercises, pentatonic scale exercises, blues scale exercises, and to finish, if you had to choose one scale to improvise on the 12-bar blues, what would it be? Before we start, let me just say that you can buy the PDFs of all the exercises of this video. The backing track is of course also included with the PDFs, so the link is in the description of this video. And again, you can support my work by making a donation, and I thank all the people who have already supported me for this video and whose name will appear at the end of this video. About the 12-bar blues, there exists many forms of 12-bar blues structure, and today we're gonna be studying a simple shuffle blues in A. The chord structure will appear on the screen, so as you can see it's divided into 3 parts of 4 bars each. The first part consists only of A7, and on the second part we have twice D7, then we have twice A7. And on the last part we have E7, D7, A7, and if we want to go back to the top to play it, say twice or 3 times or even more, we have to put dominant E7, or else we would just have to finish with the chord of A7. It's a simple chord structure, but it still has a few chord changes, so we will still have to pay attention to the notes we use at very specific moments. Therefore, the 12-bar blues is a very good way to start learning jazz and improvisation over chord changes. For the first exercise, we're just gonna play the bass line, that is the root of each chord, and we're gonna play it with a simple swing pattern. It goes like this. So we have a down bow, then we have an up bow that we play as a ghost note or a muted note, so you play it just leaving the finger on the string but releasing the pressure of the finger like this. And then we play 2 quavers with a shuffle rhythm. So then you can repeat that, and it goes like this. So this will also give us the opportunity of practicing our swing bowing. Let's go. Now we're going to study more specifically the simple arpeggios and scales that you can play on the 12-bar blues. So our standard 12-bar blues consists simply of 3 chords, A7, D7 and E7. So on the chord of A7 we have the arpeggio A, C sharp, E and G. So we can also play the scale that goes with this chord, that is the Mixolydian scale of A. So it goes like this: A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G natural. For the chord of D7 we have the arpeggio D, F sharp, A, and C. So we have the scale D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C. And to finish, we have the chord of E7, so we can play the arpeggio E, G sharp, B, and D. So the scale is E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, and D. Usually advanced players try to avoid playing the preferred fourth on a major chord or use it simply as a passing note because of the dissonance it produces with the major third. But for the following exercises, we're not going to worry about that, as the goal here is simply to get familiar with the chord structure and the chord changes. Before we move on to the next exercises, let me just say that they all follow a simple logic, so you don't have to look at the parts to do the exercises. Everything can be figured out in your head, and by the way, that's the way one can develop its improvisation skills. Remember that the PDFs are there to give you indications on what to practice or to answer your questions if you're having doubts about what you should play on a given chord. But you shouldn't practice only while looking at the PDFs, which would be counterproductive if you want to learn how to improvise. So to do the exercises, I suggest that you first play along with a video, looking at the score displayed below the screen only when necessary. Then you play on the backing track with the PDF, looking at the PDF only when you're having doubts. And finally, you play on the backing track without the PDF. Feel free to jump directly to step 3 at first, then go back to step 1 or 2 if you found it difficult. The exercises, which are divided into several series, are designed for beginner jazz players, and therefore you will only have to play them in first position. However, the last exercise of each series might prove tricky even for more advanced players, and you can also feel free to adapt them for higher positions. One more thing. When you're doing the exercises, it's not a problem if you don't play the exact same notes as I do. What's important is that you follow the principle of the exercise. Now we're gonna start with the arpeggios. I will first play the arpeggios as quarter notes going up, going back to the root when I've reached the highest notes or at each chord change. Let's go. Now I will play them starting with the root but going down. Finally, I'll play the arpeggios, starting with the root, going up and going down as soon as I've reached the highest note, and so on. And therefore, I will follow a continuous movement. Let's go. This last exercise allows us to hear the chord changes in the middle of a musical phrase, and so that forces us to adapt the notes of the phrase to the chords. Okay, so now I'm gonna do the same 3 exercises as quavers, so twice as fast. And I'm gonna use shifted legatos. So it's gonna go like this. Okay, now let's go. Now we're gonna do the scale exercises the same way we have practiced the arpeggios. First, I will play the scales as quarter notes, going up and going back to the root at each chord change. Then I will play the scales starting with the root but going down. Finally, I will play the scales, starting with the root, going up and going down as soon as I reach the highest note, thus following a continuous movement. Again, as for the arpeggios, the last exercise is trickier because it makes you adapt the notes to each chord change in the middle of a scale. The only notes that we have to adapt are C and G that can be either sharp or natural. The other notes don't change at all from one scale to another. Okay, so are you ready to fasten up the tempo? Now I'm gonna play the same 3 exercises as quavers. Let's go. I've played the quavers with shifted legatos, but of course you can practice them with all sorts of bowings like détaché or different types of legatos, and this is indicated in the PDFs. Now we're gonna move on to pentatonic scales. Those are 5-note scales and they are common to many music traditions all over the world. They are really convenient for improvisation and you should practice them. The major pentatonic scale consists of the notes 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the major scale. So for the chord of A major we have A, B, C sharp, E, and F sharp. For D major we have D, E, F sharp, A, and B. And for E major we have E, F sharp, G sharp, B, and C sharp. Now I'm gonna do the same 3 scale exercises with major pentatonic scales played as quavers. Ready? Let's go. the most important characteristics of jazz and blues music is that you can play a minor scale on a major chord. On an A major chord, you could play the minor third C instead of C sharp, like this. Therefore, now we're gonna practice the minor pentatonic scale on the major 12-bar blues. The minor pentatonic scale consists of the notes 1, 3, 4, 5, 7 of the minor scale. So on A we have A, C, D, E, and G. On D we have D, F, G, A, and C. And on E we have E, G, A, B, and D. Okay, now let's practice the 12-bar blues with the minor pentatonic scales. Now we've arrived to the blues scale. The blues scale consists simply of the pentatonic scale on which you add a blue note. So for the major blues scale, you will need to take the major pentatonic and you will need to add the minor third. So for A major, you have the following scale. For D major, you have and for E major you have. For the minor blues scale, you will need to take the minor pentatonic and you will need to add the diminished fifth. On A, that would give the following scale. On D we have. And on E we have. It's important to keep in mind that the first blues players didn't consider it as a scale, but played it under the form of licks. Of course, you can consider it as a scale, but always practice it in a musical way under the form of licks, or you would risk sounding too much like a student. Now that we've done the previous exercises on arpeggios and scales, I assume that you are already quite comfortable with the 12-bar blues structure. So I won't be doing the full practice routine for the blues scales, just one exercise for quarter notes and one for quavers. Let's start with the major blues scale. Now the minor blues scale. As you might have noticed, playing the blues scales, another form of musical phrases or licks, is already starting to sound like improvisation. If you had to choose one scale, what would it be? Well, it would be the A minor pentatonic scale, because not only does it work on the A7 chord, because the C natural can be considered as a blue note, but it's also included in the scale of D7 and almost included in the scale of E7. So we could use this scale on the whole 12-bar blues structure. And we could also use the A minor blues scale. So now I'm gonna do a whole chorus using only the A minor pentatonic scale and another chorus using the A minor blues scale. That's it. I hope you've liked this video. There will be another video about the 12-bar blues where I'll be talking about blues licks and gimmicks to get more into the jazz language. Remember that you can buy the PDFs of today's lesson in the description of this video. Please do not look at the PDFs all the time while you practice. It's important that you try without the PDFs first. Buying them will also be a way to support my YouTube channel and the future videos. As always, feel free to like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you!